Welcome to the Thrive in the Workplace podcast, brought to you by The Wellness Theory in partnership with B1G1 Business for Good. This podcast is all about uplifting organisations to thrive when it comes to all things workplace wellbeing. From organisational culture, the most effective wellness campaigns you can imagine, and integrating social good. You will find insights, inspiration and information that supports leaders at all levels to implement best practices to improve engagement, performance and vitality within the workforce. We believe that workplaces can and should be healthy and sustainable for both the workforce, the bottom line and the community. And in this podcast, we'll show you how. And just so you know, for every listen this podcast gets, we'll be donating to a life-saving project aligned with the UN 2030 global goals. So thank you for being here and continuing the ripple effect. Without further ado, join us to thrive in the workplace and become a force for good in the world. Welcome to today's show, everyone. I'm your host, Charlotte Stebbing-Mills, and today I'm joined by Lizzie Butcher. After 10 plus years of working in corporate travel technology startups, Lizzie became an ICF accredited transformational coach in 2020. She's based in the Middle East and she works with companies to deliver workshops and trainings on enhancing emotional resilience, stress management, and effective decision making. Lizzie specializes in working with professional women to help them build self-assurance and confidence in the workplace through mastering their emotions. Welcome to the show, Lizzie. It's so good to have you here.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm really excited to jump into this conversation with you because you focus on a very specific group of people within the work that you do. So before we jump into that, can you share a little bit about your journey transitioning from kind of corporate career in travel tech to becoming a transformational coach? You know, what inspired the shift and how did all of this come about?
Interesting. Okay, let's go straight into it. So yeah, my background is in travel tech. So I relocated to the Middle East, initially from London, 5 years ago now. And yeah, and then I moved into coaching about 2.5, 3 years ago. And the journey from that, I think when you look back, it's obvious, like the dots really always connect. But at the time, there was this kind of space and gap and something I wanted more from my life, from my job. Like, yes, I was enjoying the corporate side, but I retrained in coaching during COVID. So I still had my kind of full-term job. And it was that instant knowing, this fire in the belly feeling of this is it. This is what I'm here to do. And that passion and quickly progressed into coaching within the company itself. And then I soon realized that still wasn't it. That still wasn't enough for me. So I launched my business soon after that. And how it's kind of evolved into the focus that I do now. So my focus is around leaders, is around both people moving into leadership or new leaders, or even kind of been there for a few years, and understanding how emotions, emotional regulation, emotional intelligence all plays such a key part in your happiness and in your success in that position. And the reason why I have chosen that kind of niche and that speciality to focus on is so much through my own experience. And let's just go straight into it, of like confessions of corporate life, of things that I have kind of moved through myself. But specifically as a female to be honest, it was quite like a male-dominated industry in the travel tech space. I quite honestly didn't really use my voice as much as I could have or wanted to. I guess on the surface, there was a level of confidence. I was in sales, I had that charisma, I could build the relationships. However, to fulfill my potential, I was holding myself back, and that was through a lot of fear and kind of lack of worth in myself. So that played out of avoiding confrontation, avoiding conflicts, or the opposite, whenever that kind of came up, feeling overwhelmed. So big emotions coming up, and that physically came out of me as tears. And that kind of process was so frustrating to feel really helpless in those moments and feel like it was just happening to me, like the emotions were just happening to me. I didn't have the control there. However, what I have since learned in my journey, and both through like coaching, but I guess other practices, is the control comes from me. Like if I take that responsibility and if I take that power back, then I have an influence of, first of all, what I even think, let alone how I act, but then of course how I can show up in those situations. So to then be a leader, both now in the coaching space, but previously in the travel tech space, like that had to come from me. It had to come from saying, I don't want to act like this anymore. And what can I do about it? And learning both like the tools and the kind of practical ways, but equally moving through like the self-reflection and breaking down the steps to find out the trigger, being like, okay, why am I avoiding the confrontation? It's not just pointing the finger and placing the blame on my manager or the workload or the environment. It's like, who am I in that space? So the passion that comes from the work that I do is really from like first-hand experience, and now allowing myself to support other leaders, to navigate that, to really claim back that power and just feel comfortable in those situations that they once feared is really what drives me.
I love that so much. And thank you so much for sharing your personal experience in there as well, because I think that's so important and it doesn't get spoken about enough. Especially to you, I was in a very male dominated industry, and that can really have an imprint on females in those male dominant industries. And for me, I experienced a similar thing early in my career with the confrontation. Like bursting into tears, not being able to say what I wanted to say. There was anxiety coming up for me. That was in like the really, really early days of my career though. And then I went the other way and almost like just didn't show my emotions as much as I possibly could throughout, well, really all areas of my life in hindsight. But actually in the workspace, I would not dare to show my emotion unless it got on top of me. I then couldn't help to show my emotion, right? So I understand like why you've moved into this, and clearly I think you just answered my next question, which was going to be like, why have you chosen this group specifically, particularly women, and like confidence and self-assurance? Because I find that so fascinating, because there's so many women globally, but I think particularly in this region, who are dropping out of senior positions because they are struggling with these kinds of issues, alongside wanting to start families and different pressures and responsibilities and things like that play a part. But I think when we kind of drill back and look behind the surface, our ability to be ourselves, speak up, say what's bothering us, to be assertive when you need to be, and to really be able to use your voice, like you said, like it's becoming a bit of a lost art. So tell us a little bit more about that and why you've like dived into confidence and self-assurance over pretty much anything else.
Absolutely. And there's a few things that I kind of picked up on what you shared there about going the other end of the scale of not showing emotion. For me, positivity was this key of putting this face on, putting that smile, suppressing everything else, as that was almost, quite honestly, still kind of is seen as the go-to reaction. You have to be optimistic, you have to be positive in these situations to be able to lead and move forward. And a lot of emotions are deemed as, or like bracketed as negative and bad, and you shouldn't show them. So whether that be anger or fear or distress, like all of these kind of uncomfortable feelings are just pushed away. So I can definitely relate with that positivity kind of front that I used. And what I've since used now is every emotion is purely a signal, and it's information, and it's coming up for a reason. And if you kind of lower that pressure and intensity of what it's trying to mean or trying to show you, like take away the story that you initially associate with anger, being like, oh, it's really negative, it's really bad. Like, just let it be, how is that manifesting in your body? How is that showing up? And what do you need from that? Maybe you just need a bit more air and space, and move yourself away from that situation. But I say, in coming back to your question around confidence, it really does link into that, because for me, what I define confidence is actually being able to navigate the discomfort, because we're never just automatically confident. We don't wait until we're okay, I'm really confident at doing this said thing, I'm really confident in driving a car now, I'm just going to go drive. No, you have to go through the steps and process of the discomfort of first getting in the car and learning where the positions are, and first going out on the road. It's going to feel uncomfortable, but you have to build up that evidence for your brain to know you're safe and you are okay, and taking those steps slowly. And that, for me, is what confident is. It's a journey, and it's having the ability to manage those uncomfortable emotions through that process is where your power lies. Because once you understand that you can feel that discomfort, and it's okay to whatever kind of comes up in that moment, once you learn that practice, perhaps in a smaller example. So if you're, I don't know, pushing back and saying to a friend, you're like, actually, I'm exhausted this week, and can we rearrange, or I just need some time for myself rather than seeing you this weekend, and explaining that, how you can learn that process and then applying it into something within the workplace that perhaps has a bit more kind of, a bit more about it, that you can apply the same technique across.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting the way you link the confidence to emotional regulation, right? Because anybody in a work setting, they're trying to juggle their competence of their skill set, right? They're constantly trying to do better, and to say do better, but they're trying to fulfill their job role, right? And most of the time, high performers, those that are striving to lead at higher levels, are always pushing those boundaries, right? So they are trying to do better, go the extra mile. They're trying to squeeze everything they can out of the day, out of the projects that they're working on, out of their life, and absolutely everything. And if we don't recognize a link between emotional regulation and confidence, it's very easy to then completely lose track of who it is we are within that work environment. The amount of leaders I speak to that genuinely say to me, I don't know who I am anymore. Like, outside of work, I don't know who I am. Their identity is completely linked to that job role, or to that organization. And that is a scary place to be. And it's something that, if we don't address the emotions that are going on behind it, it becomes a very, very detrimental dialogue, where we start to, drop levels of self-esteem. We start to notice imposter syndrome kicking in. You start to notice so many things, but instead of seeing them for what they are, because there's so much emotional charge present, it then becomes, it's me that's the problem. I'm bad. I can't lead. I'm letting my team down. I'm letting the stakeholders down. And it becomes this almost like personal attack on self. And actually, when we can start to regulate those emotions, I think, well, actually, we remove the charge, and now you can see it for what it is. Okay, give me the fact of the situation, and let's start to work on what's actually happening there. And so I'm fascinated to understand more around the work you do around emotional regulation, particularly for women that are experiencing these kind of problems in the workplace. And men experience it too. We're just obviously talking about women with background.
Yeah, of course. Just to kind of pick up on one thing that you mentioned right at the end there of what is the fact. And I think that's what we quickly forget to question. And how I love to incorporate this with the women that I work with is connecting the mind into the body. And it's a constant feedback loop, because our emotions are essentially, I say it's made up of three kind of areas, how emotions are created. The first is around body budget. So what I mean by body budget is how you are. If you think of yourself as a battery, full of a green light battery, when you're going lower, like, what are those compartments? That's going to be good nutrition, good sleep, good exercise and movement, good hydration. it's the basics and it's the foundations that we know. So questioning kind of first where your body budget level is when you're experiencing the emotion, it just gives you a bit more information of being like, I'm probably a bit tired today, so my brain's going to be working harder to understand this situation. That's the first point. The second is your interpretation of this current situation in front of us. So our brain is programmed to do the quickest kind of interpretation possible. It's using previous information and it wants to keep you safe. So if something is on fire, you're going to immediately say, alert, run away, get the hell out of there. However, sometimes that situation needs to be questioned of what the actual fact is, just like you're saying there. So we can't just immediately predict that it is the worst situation. And then finally is the third part is the prediction. So your brain's predicting how to experience this emotion. So for example, if you are experiencing anxiety from being questioned on an email or questioned on your work, being like, why has this not been done at this time? This is because you've experienced anxiety and that reaction previously. However, this is where your kind of power lies, and it's breaking down that sequence of events. So just because the emotion is coming up, it doesn't necessarily mean that the level of emotion or reaction needs to be equivalent to that. So when in that situation, when you're saying, okay, I feel really anxious, just pausing and questioning, okay, but what is the reality of this situation? Am I in danger? Is this person actually trying to support me with this questioning? And what's their intention there? And just breaking it down. And quite honestly, the pause is the biggest power in that moment. But coming back to that feedback loop of both your mind and your body, anxiety, if we keep on the theme of anxiety there, anxiety is an individual experience, but I'll just say how it feels for me. For me, it's a tense stomach, my heart might race, my palms might get sweaty. And I notice that and my body's saying, oh my gosh, we're feeling anxiety. I need to create a story in my head that correlates to that. However, if we pause and separate the two and say, okay, what are these sensations that are happening in my body? I'm feeling my heart race. I'm feeling my stomach tense. What can I do about that? I can place my hand on my heart. I can focus my breathing. I can slow my breathing down. I have control over that. I can create that time and that space and move through that sensation within my body. So once my body feels a different way in a more calmer state, what is my mind then allowed to create from that story? Then you think so much clearer, and you can quite honestly make decisions and communicate. And that's how it really plays out into the workplace. In that if you bring your focus into what you can control, whether it's questioning the reality of the facts in your mind or navigating your sensations within your body, and just having that understanding that the two are kind of working together, whether it's positively or negatively, you have influence. And then the actions that come out of that are, having a clearer mind and communicating with presence.
So what do you say to someone that's listening to this and is saying, okay, Lizzie, that all sounds great. I get it. My feelings, and, I need to pay a bit more attention and pause. But then they're thinking, but I'm too busy for this. My day is packed. My phone is constant. I've got 300 emails. I've got 500 WhatsApps. I've got a team that are like bashing on my door, trying to get my attention for what it is they need. And I've also got all of these projects that I need to be working on. What do you say to somebody who's living in that level of pressure?
And first of all, it's very, very common. And I think especially in the Middle East, and I've been working in Dubai, it's almost the norm, and it's this constant, I would say, rat race, but it's this chase for more, and it's quite easy to get lost in that. So first, having that acknowledgement that it's okay, that it's not just you that is facing that, but coming back to what you as a person can do. And it's starting really, really small. It's not saying, okay, I'm gonna revolutionize my routine and start everything from scratch on Monday morning. You've got to set yourself up for success, because essentially you have created patterns of behavior that are working for you or have been working for you. And it's only to this point now where it's starting to feel too much and it's impacting you on a greater level, whether that be your performance at work or your relationships at home with your partner or your kids, or even your health, how that's showing up. That's the first indicator of being like, okay, something needs to change. So having that awareness and owning it and just saying, actually, I don't want to continue living this way. That's an amazing place to be in. So from that, it's taking those tiny little steps. And it's interesting. So I led a workshop just last week with a group of 20 women, all incredibly high performing, achieving in the roles that they do. And the most powerful takeaway that happened in that 3-hour session was a 5-minute pause, meditation, visualization. And that was simply closing down their eyes. I just talked them through a kind of vision for the next 3 months and how they are wanting to lean into their feelings and what they want to show up as and the values that they want to be embodying. But really, it was just the pause in the space to start to acknowledge what your thoughts are and trying to slow them down and break that down. And I often teach a lot of breathing techniques with the clients that I work with. And I think even that has perhaps a certain stigma, a certain kind of presence about it around like breath work and breathing, being like, okay, it's either one end of the scale, like, yeah, I breathe every day, that's fine, or the other end of the scale of like, that's really woo-woo, like breath work, that's not for me. But what about that place in the middle where it is as simple as a couple of practices that are your go-to things to break that kind of pattern in the middle of the day, as kind of breathing in for 4, holding for 7, and breathing out for 8, or 3 deep inhales and a really big release and exhale, so you can like hear your voice, hear your kind of breath coming out. And that's a simple technique you can start to implement within your day just to reset. So rather than getting on that roller coaster and constantly creeping to the top, so you're gonna blow when that next kind of disagreement happens in the workplace, like how can you stop that? How can you pause? And it is as simple as a breathing exercise, a pause, or acknowledging what you're feeling. I think would be the final thing, is starting to kind of associate language and name what you're actually feeling. So there's a beautiful thing, you can just Google it, it's called the emotions wheel. And it's, I don't know how many emotions are on there, like a good couple of hundred or so. But a lot of the language and words that we use might not actually get down to the crux of really what we're feeling. So we're saying, oh yeah, I'm really happy today, or actually I'm really quite sad, I'm feeling a bit low. Going a bit deeper with that and understanding the language that can help you understand what it is you're feeling. So if you're feeling a bit low, why is that? Is it disappointment from something that's happened, or is it actually upset or fear? There's other words, and actually just yourself using that language and using that power to understand what you're feeling in that moment. Because really, like I said at the beginning, the emotions are their information, they're signals, that are indicated to help you understand what do you need in this moment. So if you're feeling disappointed, perhaps you just need to give yourself some compassion of saying, like, actually, this is a really challenging period of time and I need to go easy on myself. I don't actually need to take more action and do. It's actually the opposite, slow it down and move through that.
Amazing. So there's a few things in there that I think are really important to highlight. Right?
Yeah.
The first one being the pause that you mentioned, right? Because telling a busy person to breathe, sleep better, look after that body battery, that can be a little bit like frustrating. I know at times it used to be for me, for sure, until I was brought in on. However, when we look at the highest performers, when we look at your NBA superstar basketball players, when we look at your Formula One drivers, you know, they are consciously making time to pause, to rest, to make strategic decisions, to be able to make fast decisions whilst they can take a millisecond of a pause that's going to change the trajectory of the results they're going to get. And like, if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for the CEO at the helm of 1,000 employees. You know, it's something that has been proven over and over and over again in so many other fields that sometimes we forget to pay attention to that in our day-to-day life, almost as if that's okay for them. It's not okay. It's not for me, it's for them. But actually that pause, it helps to regulate by bringing our nervous system back into a state where it can actually be resourceful, right? Because if you've got all of these emotions, like you've just described, hundreds of emotions, like potential of hundreds of emotions, and us usually having a cocktail of lots of those happening in our system every single day, that starts to push our nervous system out of rhythm a little bit, right? If we end up in those hyper aroused states and we are go all the time and do all of the time, and it's coming from a place that isn't sustainable, that's how we end up burning out. And if we're ignoring the emotions, we experience a lot of emotional burnout as well as physical burnout, because there's many different types, I think, that also gets overlooked, but that's a podcast for another day. And so then sometimes the opposite happens, right, which is where we're in those go states and then suddenly we crash, right? And you can't concentrate when you're trying to do what it is you're doing, or you need that holiday, you become desperate for it, or you end up short-tempered with the people around you. And that is a clear sign that something is out of balance, right? And there's a dysregulation. So if we do that over a prolonged period of time, it becomes a lot harder to then label those emotions that you just described. And we become so far removed from what I'm actually feeling versus what now I'm used to feeling. Just because we're used to going at that kind of high intense pace doesn't mean that that's the healthiest, right? Or even most resourceful. So on your point of taking a pause, I think sometimes we have to take a step back to be able to take a step forward, right? Or just take that moment to be a springboard to set you off even faster. Like when you pull back a rubber band, right? And all of a sudden it will go a million times further than if you just like threw it. And you have to start to entertain these ideas if we want to see change, right? And lasting change, because nobody wants a superstar in their role for like a month or a year or 2 years, right? They want to be in it for the career. They want to be in it for the long haul, you know. And I think sometimes it's too easy to see the instant gratification rather than to see, okay, well, actually, if I'm thinking better, if I'm feeling better, then actually I'll be able to go so much further and have a bigger impact, whatever that looks like for the individual, on their family, on their workplace, on their colleagues and everything else. The second piece of what you said around labeling emotions, this gets overlooked massively, I think. And I'm definitely guilty of this. Somebody says, "How are you?" I'm busy, right? I'm good. I'm really busy, right? And that's exactly, that's like the go-to phrase, particularly in this region, right? And I think sometimes we don't look behind the curtain to see, okay, well, what else? Like, busy is a state. That's not actually an emotion. So tell us a little bit more about emotions in general. And you've already mentioned the emotion chart, which is amazing. So anybody that's not sure perhaps what they're feeling, definitely go out. But is there any other kind of tips or benefits to labeling the emotions that you think our listeners need to be aware of?
Another way that I like to approach emotions or kind of define them is breaking it down to emotions, emotion, energy, and motion, and just simplifying it in that sense, in that, like I was saying earlier, like to separate the emotion or the sensation that's being experienced from the story, and simply knowing that it's energy, it is something that is going to come and is going to pass, and it's our choice in what we kind of hold on to and choose to feel. And again, I totally understand there. Like, okay, I don't want to choose to feel this way anymore. I want to avoid this. But the opposite is always the case. And again, coming back to my own kind of personal journey and reflection from that, the most important things and learnings through life are the things that you're avoiding. And by avoiding them and suppressing them and ignoring them, you hope and you expect for them to disappear. And it's the opposite. They manifest. They subconsciously are influencing how you're acting and how you're showing up. So actually, by inviting emotions in, I know that sounds kind of really lame, actually. I'll bring that down to earth a bit more. Like, how do you invite emotions in? I'd say the same. I'd be like, what are you talking about? But instead, first, like you say, like of that labeling, of questioning, of and that could start of being like, okay, I'm going to start to practice writing down, I am feeling XYZ because of this situation, and not trying to change it, not trying to look for a solution. Instead of being like, okay, well, I feel really uncomfortable, so what should we do? Like, what's the next step to move out of this? Again, coming back to that pause, but just acknowledging and separating yourself from the feeling by writing it down, you can then start to observe and look at your words and acknowledge that this is an experience. It's not forever, it's coming, it's going, but it's an experience in the moment, to kind of and let that go. And from that kind of writing down process, we can then choose to reframe and redefine. So just as you were saying with the badge of honor of busy, like it's our go-to word, our phrase, whether it's busy or you're fine, it's this quick kind of phrase. Redefining that is within your power. So what other ways are you going to describe? So, okay, your schedule might be packed, you might be really fulfilled this week with everything you're doing. Yes, that could be defined as being busy, but how else could you describe that? And shaping that into something that is manageable for you, again, just brings that back, that power.
It really does. So I have adopted a new word that gives me a very different feeling when I say it. So instead of saying I'm busy now, I tend to say life is very full and I'm feeling XYZ, right? Whatever that is. And as soon as I say life is full, actually there's just like this stir of gratitude, rather than this like sense of urgency and busyness. That small little word change can start to make a bit of a difference. Just on your comment, like inviting your emotions in does not sound like lame at all.
Like, does that sound okay?
Necessary, because if we don't, the consequences they can be horrendous, right? If we do not invite our emotions in and start to pay attention to them, like we said at the beginning of this episode, our confidence plummets, right? Those emotions stack up. They don't just disappear, right? If we don't think about them, it's not like they just vanish, right? They stack up and we get to the point, like you mentioned earlier, an explosion, whatever that looks like, right? Whether that's with a loved one, with a colleague, and there's just the final cherry on the cake that tips you over the edge, you know, that something will happen that will make you suddenly pay attention to your emotions. And most people listening to this probably relate to experiencing that at some point anyway. But the difference is what you said is you've got a choice. Right, we've got a choice how we then respond to them. So we can choose whether to avoid them and to just put it down to another stressful day or a busy day or the workload or whatever. Or we can choose to sit down and essentially like look them in the eye, right? Whether that's writing them down, whether that's talking about them. For a long time, I used to believe that emotions were a call to action. And I've since learned that they are a call to wisdom. Emotions are a call to wisdom, because sometimes we don't have to act on the feelings that we have. And I think that's a really, really important clarification to make for anybody that feels like they live this fast-paced, high-performance kind of life, or at least they try and be better, right? Whatever that is. Because not everything needs to be acted upon. If we are thinking, okay, well, I'm feeling anxious today, okay, then tomorrow I must wake up and I must do breath work, right? Or I'm feeling stressed, so I must do this. And actually, like, the most wise thing you can do is just notice the emotion, notice the sensations that are attached to the emotion, obviously, in the body, and then look for what you described as the learning. What can I learn from this? What is this emotion actually here to teach me? Why is this emotion knocking on my door through sweaty palms, or through heart palpitations, or through tears, right? Or through being short-tempered? That's your emotions knocking on the door, trying to get your attention. So like the lessons that come with it is a massive step in discharging that emotion, so it doesn't continue to repeat itself in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's it. It doesn't need to continue to, you don't need to continue to react or respond in these certain ways. Like, everything that is within your control. And it's a difficult kind of place to be. I completely resonate with being in that fast-paced environment when everything feels too much and saying, I can't control this. But in slowing things down, that's where the power is. And it's interesting, I had a conversation with a CEO this week who, how to describe him, he's the most incredible entrepreneur, multiple businesses, many people beneath him, and he noticed the impact in how his teams were able to respond and sort of communicate with him through how he is being. And he noticed the sensation and the fear and the kind of panic that so many of his managers and middle managers were with him when they were communicating. They were almost keeping back information, unable to receive feedback, unable to make decisions for themselves because they sensed so much stress from him. And he realized how much his own emotional regulation and the importance of that was affecting essentially his whole business and his whole teams, and how he was then able to start to choose and start to redefine certain things that he was feeling about himself and within the team, of being like, okay, like, is this the world's biggest problem? Like, is it going to get solved today? Maybe not. Is it okay that it's not going to get solved today? That's it. Yes. And how he was then able to show up, the ripple effects in then how people were starting to communicate with him, how to respond with him, and just the tension in the room just then dissipated. And that's what it is. It's not just about you. It's not just about your own feelings and the thoughts and stories that are going on in your own head. Especially as a leader, you are an influence, you are a motivator. People are looking up to you for trust, for reassurance, for so many other things. And it is your responsibility to first look after yourself and both look after yourself, but also like change those behavioral patterns and responses in order for those around you and the teams beneath you to really succeed and feel good in what they do. Because essentially what happened in that situation, tension was released, happiness was kind of reinstalled, confidence was placed in everybody, and the output and the work performance then increases.
That is such an important point. The contagion is real, right? One way or the other. You're either going to be in the great example that you just shared, or you're going to be having the complete opposite. So if anyone's listening to this and they're noticing those patterns within their team, first look in the mirror, right? It's the one start, right? Like you said, people are looking up there, they are reacting to how you're responding to them, and if you're doing that mindlessly, then you're not going to get the desired results that you want, no matter how many disciplinary meetings you have with that employee, or how many conversations you have with that person, or the different tactics that you try. It's going to start with that state of the leader. With a leader that perhaps is wanting to create that kind of change in their business, what are some of the common challenges you face that stops them from doing that? There's one for me that springs to mind, which is vulnerability and that fear of being vulnerable. So I'm curious to know your thoughts on that, but also like what other key challenges are there that stop somebody from really leaning into controlling their emotions a little bit, or influencing their emotions more efficiently?
Yeah, that's a really nice question. So I think first, on that first point of vulnerability, and asking yourself why, and just like you're saying, looking in the mirror and taking that back and kind of understanding what meaning and understand you're associating with being vulnerable. Because I think typically we have so often been taught that vulnerability is a weakness, and expressing those said failures or disappointment is wrong, and that shouldn't be celebrated. But just like we're doing with emotions, like failures again, or deemed failures, are all a learning, and all essentially it's how your interpretation of what that event or that failure is and what you're taking from it. So in terms of vulnerability, it's like, okay, what's my intention behind this? What is my intention of being vulnerable? And doing that with a conscious kind of influence or focus. So taking that kind of, I don't know, half an hour or space yourself to think about that before you go into the action of being vulnerable with your team, and thinking, okay, I'm doing this with the intention of XYZ, whether that be to reinforce trust, to know that it's okay to make mistakes, because then we can learn from that and move forward. And having that awareness between that intention and the kind of good motive behind it, versus just complaining or just kind of sitting in it and playing the victim, almost, of being like, oh, it's so stressful, there's everything like is against me. And there's a very fine balance. Yeah, go for it.
So glad you said that, because vulnerability isn't, you have to go and share your life story with everyone, right? And tell all your deepest, darkest secrets. It is, like you said, it's about being intentional, being relatable, and building that trust, and saying, hey, listen, like, I'm human too. I've also experienced some of the challenges maybe that you're experiencing right now, or if not specifically, you can have some kind of like synergy with that person. Because I think there's a lot of pressure out there and mixed messages for leaders right now around like being more empathetic and being more compassionate, and then they're like, I don't want to be their best friend, and like, yeah, of course, right? It's got to be real and relatable and authentic. I think that's really key. So yeah, I think that's a really, really great point, and it's great to distinguish the difference there. So what other challenges are you noticing perhaps with those that are struggling to emotionally regulate, or really stop and take that pause to be able to then move into those next steps?
Yeah, I think for me, it's people often looking for almost that quick fix of being like, hey, what should I do in the moment of when I feel this emotion? Like, what should I do there? But actually, the focus and almost like the work that you need to be looking at is kind of 180 or a few steps back from that. And it's who you are as a person. Like, first of all, what else is going on? How, like I said, with the body budget, like, how are you supporting yourself? Like, are you slowing down and switching off at the weekend? Are you taking time to fill up your cup in different ways? But a key way that I always like to work through with my clients is, as a leader, what is that to you? And actually stopping and breaking that down into, perhaps that be values or certain examples or certain emotions and feelings, and what you want to create. And again, it's that intention, it's that conscious kind of, okay, stop, think, like, who am I showing up as here? And because I feel a lot of the leaders that I work with have been perhaps promoted or put in these positions, sometimes without the support that they really want and really need. So they're brand new to perhaps leading a team or having influence over certain stakeholders. They're out of their depth, and perhaps, the strategy is being supported, of being like, I'll lead you in this way. But from the more personal, emotional side, this is where perhaps like the gap lies. And that, if you don't have that within the support in the workplace, that's okay. You can still take that ownership yourself and say, okay, who am I as a leader? Like, what do I want to show up as? Is empathy going to be my strength, or is it something else? Because, and I think where women perhaps struggle, and I particularly see this in the Middle East, is that because there perhaps are less or fewer women in higher roles and higher positions, naturally they're looking into other male leaders, and they are embodying and showing different strengths. So like, oh, I need to be like them and show exactly the way that they lead and do that for myself. And that's where the problems and the challenges lie, because just like you're saying, it's inauthentic. It's to themselves of both who they are as a person, but who they naturally can be as a leader. You don't need to repeat the same thing, especially from a man to a woman. You're going to naturally have like different characteristics and strengths that you want to lean into. So with that, focusing on your leadership skills, but also your strengths, and acknowledging that these are the things that I want to kind of grow and develop, and being aware of your weaknesses and support and getting support from others with that. So you don't need to be it all. And that's where the emotional kind of pressure really comes to, of being like, I need to be everything for everyone. No, you need to understand yourself enough to be able to communicate what's your strengths and who you want to be, and lean into that, and ask for the support in other ways.
Nice. I think it's absolutely essential to repeat what you've said about if you don't have the organizational support right now with where you are, you can still create that support within you and be your own support system. Sometimes that might feel lonely, which is why they can reach out to people like you, and obviously specialize in this kind of work. But also there'll be other people within the organization that are feeling the same way. So how does an organization start to support their women in particular, because that's who we've been speaking about today, or even men with emotional regulation? How do they start? How do they start to build that in?
I think just as you say, like, other people are feeling that way, and that needs to be open. The environment needs to be supported. So whether that be certain sessions focused around openness and trust and communication of what's going on, or even just instilling that in your kind of team meetings, ensuring that these topics are made visible and kind of heard, and questioning and making space to check in with how each other's feeling in an open environment. And it's because, like we're saying, like, everything that we ignore and suppress doesn't go away. Like, it's there, it manifests. So just bringing it to the table. So as a leader, showing that vulnerability, it's both vulnerability and strength. It's kind of, okay, I'm going to be vulnerable and share what I felt difficult in the last couple of weeks, and what else have you guys found difficult, and then knowing how we can use that as a strength as a team together. So there, I think the key is around like connection, and it's the environment, and it doesn't need to be, I think what I always try to encourage with any sort of change or any sort of move into a different way of responding is those tiny little steps. That's what really builds into a whole new culture, a whole new way of being, a whole new feeling. So starting small in that conversation and bringing the awareness and checking in and asking those questions is the very first place I would start.
Nice, perfect. And yeah, it's essential, right? It's to start opening the conversations. And it doesn't mean you have to be your team's therapist. It just means that you have to really want to know the answer when you say, how are you? I think that's a really, really good start. Something that became quite common, particularly during the pandemic, was the check-in, right? Almost like the little wellness check before every meeting or the start of every meeting, going around actually sharing how you're feeling. And it'd be so easy for somebody that's listened to this episode to perhaps go and look up that emotion chart, put it on the wall in the office, or bring it up if they're on a remote call with their team, and just get people to pinpoint. Maybe they'll offer to share it, maybe they won't, give them the option. But it's a starting point, and it's something that the more we can start to speak about emotions, And again, not for hours and hours a day, you know, but just these small little check-in moments. It interrupts that pattern of everything building up. And from there, you get to know your teams better, you get to know each other better, and that safety is created and that trust is created, which then obviously unlocks Pandora's box for so many more like great creative solutions to whatever you're working on, whatever that looks like. Lizzie, you've been working in the Middle East for a while. I'm curious to know if you've seen any unique cultural or regional factors that are affecting emotional regulation and confidence in the workplace.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I'm trying to think. So I don't know, what do you have any things in mind or any examples from your side? And then I might be able to think from there.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that we've noticed is, and through some of our surveys that we do, we start to understand different demographics. And when it comes to emotions, one of the things we've seen is actually a high amount of resentment for certain cultures within companies. And often bigger companies, but there's like certain nationalities get certain promotions, or they get put into roles perhaps they're not ready for, just because they're from a certain place or they speak a certain language. And obviously this has got a lot to do with diversity and inclusion rather than the confidence like piece and the emotion piece. But there's so much emotion attached to that I'm just curious if there's anything in particular that you have seen, or any examples that you've noticed that have been approached really, really well by a company, or perhaps what you would do if you had, let's say, the 20 women in a workshop that you described last week, and there was some resentment showing up due to some of these unique differences. Like, how would you deal with that? What would you say to perhaps anybody listening that could be dealing with that?
Yeah, I think for me, that feels quite like complex question, because there's a lot going on there in sort of terms of diversity and inclusion. And I guess what it comes back to is your own personal bias and your own personal kind of viewpoint of the situation. So naturally there might be resentment, because quite honestly, there will be a level of bias, and people are being hired or promoted or kind of given more focus because of things that you don't agree with, and it might be down to that cultural differences. And bringing emotions into that is navigating and choosing what you want to invest your energy into, almost. So I guess one is bringing compassion and understanding that just because you have a level of awareness that this is happening doesn't necessarily mean the other person is. So approaching with compassion and understanding, because what emotions always comes back to is how you are reacting and responding. You can't control the other people, and quite honestly, there are going to be levels of frustration and disappointment that you will experience because of the situations in front of you. However, separating yourself from that situation and saying, actually, what do I want to have a voice in? What do I want to almost choose to take home with me, and what choose to feel? And it might sound cold, but it's almost like you need to have that separation and saying, I'm not going to let myself get lost in this narrative, in this kind of disagreement or situation, because I'm protecting my own energy reserves and I'm protecting my own emotions. And I think that's a level of almost like resilience comes into it. There's obviously so much good and love in the world, but there's also so much bad. There's really, really challenging situations, and how you move through that and navigate it within yourself is all about a choice. So coming back to like the workplace, in those situations, thinking of that bigger picture, of being like, who am I? What is my purpose within this organization, within my career kind of whole trajectory, and separating yourself from those situations.
I think it's paramount, isn't it? Because, you know, politics is everywhere, right? And it's rife in the workplaces. There's all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes you definitely have to remove yourself to be reflective before you can efficiently express yourself. Because otherwise you end up getting into something that perhaps you didn't even want to get into, you know, but you got into it because your colleague was complaining about the same thing, and actually right now already you're failing to do that step that you mentioned, and that's to take a step back, separate yourself, and look at who you are first. So I think it's so important to speak up for what we believe in, and obviously to strive for you know, equality and things like that, whatever the politics that's happening in that workplace. I think it's just really important that it's coming from a place of clarity and understanding, rather than from a place of resentment or fear that this person's going to get that or experience that and I'm not, and lack mindset and things like that. There's so many things like that are pointing to that wisdom that lays inside the emotion, right? And if we're failing to do that, you'll get sucked into it. And these aren't necessarily just cultural differences, you know, like I said, this could be any kind of office politics, but often one of the things that leaders also share with us is that, you know, they're sick of it. They're sick of teams playing games. They're sick of it. And we've got like perhaps some of the more mid to senior level managers that are sandwiched between the two. They know there's politics going on in that super senior team, and then like below them there's also drama going on, and then it's like they're stuck in the middle, and it's exhausting. They're taking a step back and really just addressing your own feelings about the situation and perspective and narrative you're attaching to it is necessary. Otherwise, again, fast track to burnout, to not enjoying your job, to being unfulfilled, to being disengaged, right? And then another conversation.
Absolutely.
Lizzie, is there anything else that we haven't mentioned that our listeners must hear when it comes to emotional regulation and confidence in the workplace?
Anything else need to hear? I would just say that my learnings and the work that I do comes from this place of power, and I think that's what's so key to kind of reinforce the message here, in that I think emotions or being emotional often has like negative connotations to it, and it's something we're not taught from a young age. We're often not taught of how to deal with our emotions or work through them, and leaning into that and taking that space to start to understand yourself, understand what you're feeling, name it, moving through that, like the tiny little steps that make you feel good. Like it comes from a place of power. And I think what a lot of the conversations that we've had today are really around that kind of that middle space, that action of like moving from one kind of response to another, like what changes can you do, but moving that focus purely down to the outcome. And by outcome is the things that I have mentioned with those really nice examples of when you shift your emotional state and your response, what are the benefits there? And that's what is really key. It affects everything. It affects your health, and by health I mean mental health as well as physical health. It affects your sleep, but then it affects like who you are as a person, who you as a partner to, and that support system to your loved ones around you. Have you got space to be creative both within the workspace and outward? Like it really is, for me, I'm so passionate about it because it's the foundation. It's the foundations for having that confidence, strength and power in who you are capable of being. And once we break it down and really simplify it, and that's what I really try to kind of emulate in my work, that once we simplify it and say, hey, like if we start with these few steps and then we move into these few steps and just build them into your natural kind of day-to-day actions, then see the kind of ripple effect that has, you can shift your whole life and your whole being so quickly. And that's the results that I often see from the clients that I work with. And there's a client that I have in mind that I worked with for 3 months, and a lot around this emotional regulation and using her voice and building that confidence. And she navigated from a senior role that she was in at the time into kind of a move across the company, because that was what she kind of communicated. We stopped working together, and then within 6 months later, she's moved to Barcelona. She's like living this fulfilled life because and then even then she was being promoted yet further in this new role. And it's because she has the foundations, the solid foundations that take you through life. And that's both within the workspace, but obviously into your personal life as well. And that's, yeah, it's important work. And I could speak about it all day, but I'm passionate about being like, set those foundations for success and you'll live a healthier, happier life.
It is. I echo that passion as well. And those results, you know, they're sort of like a drop in the ocean, because there's so many more stories like that, aren't there? And everything we do it because of emotion, right? So if we're not regulating our emotions or know how, or paying attention to them perhaps in a way that's going to make our life that little bit sweeter, then we're missing out, as far as I'm concerned. I don't think that we have to miss out, you know, like we said, emotions, you know, are the be all and end all. They're why we do everything that we do. They're why we don't do everything that we want to do. And it's absolutely necessary. And on that point, you've actually got the Emotion Toolbox, which is a program that you're giving away to any of our listeners today, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a really nice 10-day, super simple step-by-step program to start from scratch. I think like, okay, don't know anything about emotions. I'm feeling a lot at work, and moving through that and building up those tools day by day and incorporating them both into like self-reflection practices, but kind of practical things you can do in the moment to essentially help you feel confident, comfortable, and self-assured, both within work and then also out as well.
I love it. Amazing. So Lizzie, the question that I ask every guest that we have on this podcast is that for every listen this podcast gets, donations obviously made towards the 2030 UN Sustainable Goals. And you have chosen to support the cause of zero hunger. So why have you chosen for zero hunger?
For me, it's such a fundamental for life that to have the energy within your body to do the best, to succeed. And for me, it's no question. Of course, there's so many other causes, but I always reflect back to children. And if children are hungry and they can't have that energy and that capacity to learn and to receive information at that stage, then we're not setting them up for success. So I'm even getting like tingles when I'm feeling about that. And like, it means so much to support people in that way.
That's right. And to go back to what you were saying earlier in this episode around like our body battery, you know, we all know what it's like when we're hungry, right? And we're not starving. You know, anybody listening to this podcast, we are absolutely privileged to have the internet, to be able to have the time to listen to a podcast. However you're listening to it, you know, you can clearly afford food, and we get so hangry, right? We don't have what we need. So there's like so many people that are out there suffering in ways that we cannot even imagine. And just by you simply listening to this episode, you're already making a difference on that. So thank you, Lizzie, for choosing that as your cause. Anybody listening to this, please obviously share it with anybody that you feel will benefit from it. Because the more listens this episode gets, the more donations go towards that cause as well. And hopefully we start to raise the ability to emotionally regulate as a society as well. That's the goal here.
We're getting there step by step. Absolutely.
Exactly. Lizzie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It was wonderful. Really, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Today's episode was hosted by myself, Charlotte Stebbing-Mills, the co-founder of The Wellness Theory. If you enjoyed this episode, please do subscribe and share with someone who may benefit, and be part of our mission to help people realise when they're healthy and well, they can be a force for good in the world. I just wanted to share some more about our partner, B1G1. B1G1 is a global movement that enables businesses to incorporate effective impact creation into their everyday activities in a simple and powerful way. Through B1G1, businesses can choose from a wide range of verified projects around the world and integrate these impacts into their business operations. The core concept of B1G1 is that every business transaction or interaction can be directly linked to making a positive impact in our world, whether it's providing access to clean water, supporting education, planting trees, or addressing social issues. B1G1 enables businesses of all types to make a real difference. To find out more about them, visit their website at b1g1.com. Until next time, be well, mean well, and make a difference that lasts. See you in the next episode.